The movie begins with our protagonist, Nolan, having a terrible dream about his wife being shot. He suddenly wakes up from the dream, panting, and leaves to wash his face. He proceeds to take his drink and watches the television. While he drinks, the house and the furniture begin to shake and Nolan falls to the ground, showing us that he suffers from agoraphobia after the death of his wife. The next day, Nolan meets with a therapist and explains how his wife died. The two are at a restaurant, drinking. While they drink, she tells Nolan about an app that allows one to send an anonymous message to coworkers, and she plans to use it to send messages to her inconsiderate coworkers and bosses. Nolan jokes and asks if he can also use the app to send messages to his wife to inform her about how her snoring affects him. His wife feels ashamed and asks him if it's true, as Nolan once told her that her snoring was harmonious. Later on, she informs him about her decision to leave her workplace, but while she talks, Nolan notices some gunmen entering the restaurant, which led to the shooting that killed his wife. After sharing the story, Nolan then asks the therapist, Diane, why he should ever leave his house. He explains that he has food, entertainment, and employment in his house, which are the basic necessities of every man. However, she explains that he needs to talk about his wife, as talking about her is going to help him. Diane tells him that talking about her is the key solution to his problem, but Nolan refuses and tells him that he is only there for the medication. Diane explains that her job is to ensure that he heals and doesn't need the medication again, but Nolan insists that he is healing. Diane soon asks him if he's completely honest with himself, as they have been having the session for months and Nolan has never visited her office in person before. They have been having the therapy session through video call. However, Nolan tells her that it takes time for him to leave his house. Diane asks him if he's still imagining her, and Nolan tells her that he still does, imagining her playing the piano, even though he claims that he hasn't lost his mind. Diane wonders if he is someone that he speaks to in person, but Nolan tells her that he can't allow anyone to see him like that, wishing that he allowed the earthquake from last night to swallow him. Diane is surprised and asks him about the earthquake. She then advises him to do the work, even though Nolan says that he is trying as he doesn't want to be stuck there forever. Later on, she asks him about his puzzle. He looks at the table and tells her that the puzzle was a gift for his wife when she moved in. While they talk, Nolan sees a horse statue on the floor and he leaves to pick it up. He then looks through the frames on the wall and soon spots a paper, telling him to try a mantra on Shaun Namaha. Nolan begins to chant the words while he moves closer to the window. However, he is interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Nolan moves closer to the door to answer the door, but first asks for the person's name. The person is a delivery man from Path, and Nolan opens the door narrowly. He then asks him to drop the bag and also tells him that he signed the papers online. While he leaves, Nolan opens the door a little and draws the bag inside. Later on, Nolan receives a call from Grace, his sister, asking him to come over, but Nolan tells her that he can't, as he needs to rest his mind and de-stress. Grace thinks that he needs to be around people, but Nolan lies that Diane tells him that it's okay for him to stay longer at the house alone. Grace informs him that he was also shot at and he doesn't need to be alone, but Nolan gets distracted as he sees a broken egg on the floor and imagines a woman crying for help. However, Grace calls his attention back and asks him if he needs money. Nolan tells her that he is going to be fine after he leases his car and then cuts the call. Meanwhile, Nolan imagines his wife, Carla, in the room with him, and she tells him to allow someone to come over to visit him if he cannot leave the house. She tells him that being around people will help him and asks him to do her a favor by getting over himself. He then moves closer to the table to add a piece to his puzzle while his imaginary wife sits on the couch, writing. They soon hear their neighbor shouting and asking them to reduce the noise as it's affecting him. Nolan continues the mantra and moves closer to open the window, but he stops after hearing a noise. He then sits on the couch, cuddling his imaginary wife. Carla soon asks him to call her friend, Ally, to say hello and to ask how she and her family are doing. Nolan takes his phone and drops the voice message, even though he thinks that it is awkward. He begins to go through the pictures of Carla on his phone and remembers his conversations with Carla in her office. In her office, Carla writes a card and Nolan asks her if the card is for his birthday. However, Nolan plays the puzzle and switches between sleeping on the floor and the couch. While on the floor, he imagines the incident at the restaurant and two dead men. The next day, while going through some documents, Nolan receives a message from Ivy, asking how he is, but Nolan ignores the message, saying that she's the last person he wants to speak with. He then uses the camera of his phone to scan the document, but sees a different image instead of the written words on the document. Nolan believes that he is going crazy but decides to scan the document again. However, he begins to see bloodstains on the wall through the camera. He stands up and traces the bloodstain but soon stops when he sees the door to a room open. His imaginary wife asks him about what he is seeing and suggests that he eats something, saying that his brain doesn't work well on an empty stomach. Meanwhile, Nolan tells her that his stomach isn't empty as it is filled with alcohol, but Carla tells him that alcohol does not count. Nolan rushes to the kitchen and sees another broken egg on the floor, which surprises him. Carla tells him that it's another mistake, telling him to blame it on alcohol as he always does. While he takes his drug, Carla asks him if he remembers when they first started dating and he invited her to his house. Nolan has nothing in his fridge but offers her a hard-boiled egg, which he ate 4 of it. Carla then suggests that he is sleep-deprived, but Nolan asks her if she's right or if he's just going crazy. Carla tells him he isn't crazy enough to clean the same thing twice, but Nolan looks at the wall and realizes that Carla isn't there. His neighbor, Otis, soon calls out to him to stop disturbing him as everyone can hear him. Frustrated, Otis leaves for Nolan's apartment and asks to talk with him. He tells him to stop the noise as he hears multiple footsteps and arguments, but Nolan insists that he is the only one in the house. Nolan tells him that it's just him and Otis begs him to be quiet, telling him to have a little respect as the building is old. He returns inside and uses his phone camera to check the door again but finds out that he is seeing the same thing, causing Carla to tell him that he is fine. Soon after, Nolan lies down on his bed, listening to a motivational speaker, imagining everything the speaker is saying. However, Otis continues to scream, asking him to be quiet. Nolan then leaves his room to talk to him but changes his mind. While he leaves, he sees a woman figure entering his kitchen and he quickly runs after her but soon realizes that there is no one there. Nolan soon decides to cook but continues to imagine different things while he cooks. He then receives a call from Eddie, informing him that the new court date is Thursday, but Nolan tells him that he can't make it. He asks him to do something, but Eddie tells him that his hands are tight. While they talk, Eddie tells him that he should get over what has happened as he isn't the only one that lost a loved one, but Nolan is upset by the statement, forcing Eddie to apologize to him. Eddie then asks him to tell him about his agoraphobia condition, but Nolan refuses and cuts the call. Nolan receives a message from Ivy again, but he ignores it and leaves to answer the knock on the door. It is Otis again and he complains about the noise. Nolan says that he has already told him that he is the only one at home, but Otis is confused as he states that it's his first time up there. Left with no choice, Nolan tells him that he permits him to call the police and he shuts the door. After shutting the door, he imagines Carla talking with him again and she asks him what Otis came for. Nolan tells her that it's just a misunderstanding, but Carla thinks that Otis is lonely and suggests that they set him up with Beth. Realizing that he is losing his mind, Nolan asks her what is wrong with him, but Carla tells him that a stroll to the neighborhood will help him. He asks him to go, but Nolan insists that he can't go anywhere without her. However, Carla informs him that she isn't in the house also and asks him to go for the stroll, but they are interrupted by another imagination from Nolan. He sees the light in the bathroom blinking but finds out that the light is on when he checks it with his phone camera. He then proceeds into the bathroom, even though he tells Carla that the place is hot, but doesn't find anything odd inside. He brings out his phone and uses the camera again, only to see his dead body in the bathtub. Nolan immediately rushes out of the bathroom and contemplates taking a stroll but soon shuts the door. He takes his phone and calls Diane's office. Her secretary picks up the call but transfers his call to Diane. Nolan informs her about his dead body that he saw in the bathtub, but Diane tells him to calm down, asking him to breathe. She says that he needs to confront the situation and asks that he goes back inside the bathroom again. Although Nolan refuses at first, he agrees and leaves for the bathroom. Inside, he uses his phone camera and sees his dead body again, covered in blood. While they talk, Nolan gets scared when his ghost scares him, causing him to run out of the bathroom scared. Nolan picks up a knife and sits on the floor sad and frustrated. He soon hears a knock on his door and leaves to answer it, putting the knife in his pocket. The person is his landlord, Lionel. Otis complained about the noise to him and he is there to find out what was happening. Nolan asks him to enter the house and tells him about the earthquake and the dead body in his bathtub, even though Lionel claims that he didn't know about the earthquake. Nolan then asks him to check the bathroom, but Lionel disappears upon entering the bathroom. Meanwhile, Otis sees a strange thing as he sees himself going over to Nolan's apartment and disappearing into the door. Nolan opens the bathroom door but sees himself from 1 year ago. He closes the door and opens it again but sees a woman from 19 years ago. He closes the door and opens it again but sees a desert from 543 years ago. He closes the door but Otis interrupts him. However, Nolan accidentally stabs him with his knife. Nolan is surprised to see him and asks why he is there. Otis then tells him about the strange thing he saw and asks him to call 911. Nolan informs him that he doesn't have his phone and he cannot go to Otis' apartment to get the phone. Nolan tries to go outside to ask for help but cannot stop imagining the shooting incident at the restaurant. He rushes back inside and drags Otis into the bathroom. He then closes the door but Otis has disappeared when he opens the door again. He finds out that the house is littered with clothes and it's raining. While Nolan tries to make sense of what is happening, he is knocked out by someone. While gaining consciousness, he imagines the shooting spree at the restaurant and a woman crying for help. Nolan opens his eyes and sees an older version of him, sitting in front of him, eating boiled eggs while he is tied to a chair. Nolan is confused and asks him to release him, but the older Nolan asks him what he is doing in his apartment. Nolan tells him that he also lives there, but the older Nolan tells him that he has been coming in and out of the apartment through the bathroom. It turns out that the bathroom acts like a time travel machine and Nolan tells him to release him in order to go back to his timeline, but the older Nolan tells him that the bathtub is stocked up with toilet paper. He concludes that someone otherworldly is toying with him. Nolan asks him to untie him as he doesn't want his life to end in misery, but the older Nolan tells him that everyone is going to die. He asks him to have a drink with him, and while he prepares the tea, he tells Nolan that they are lucky. Nolan asks him how often he leaves the house, but the older Nolan tells him that he hasn't stepped out for a long time, saying that it gets easier the longer he stays indoors. The two take the tea, but they both die. However, Nolan is placed in a time loop and he continues to come back to life after he dies, going through the process of meeting his older version again. The time loop continues over and over again, but Nolan imagines Carla and she tells him not to take the tea. Nolan tells the older Nolan that he doesn't want to drink it, but he tries to blackmail him, telling him that his last wish is to take tea with him. Nolan then asks him for the owner of the third cup. The older Nolan informs him that it's for Otis as he was teleported to the timeline stabbed. Nolan releases himself and leaves to go to the bathroom. While he leaves, the older Nolan tells him about the occurring dream he does have. He says that he sees himself in a desert, but he feels heavy and he realizes that it's all the regrets and painful memories. He adds that he sees Carla at the other end, but he cannot meet her until he drops all the weight off him. Nolan proceeds to the bathroom, even though he sees his dead skeleton on the couch. However, Nolan cannot travel back through the bathroom, implying that he is stuck. 18 days later, Nolan imagines when he went to the restaurant with Carla. While they talk, she asks him why they are back at the restaurant, and Nolan tells her that maybe he could have saved her and everyone. He explains that he could have stopped the man when he noticed his awkward behavior instead of sitting down without doing anything. However, Carla tells him that there is nothing he could have done and asks him to leave the place, but Nolan kisses her, saying that he refuses to have a happy ending without her. Nolan sits on the floor in front of the older Nolan's dead body and keeps doing the same things for days. He sits, looks through the window, and sleeps over and over. However, he decides to face his fears and goes into the bathroom. Nolan then moves through the past and finally decides to pick an ending. He initially picks the timeline where he meets his older version but soon leaves for the bathroom. He picks the timeline where he speaks with Diane but changes the decision and finally picks the night of his date with Carla. Carla gets dressed for work and she tells him that his apartment needs a woman's touch. The two kiss and Carla leaves, telling him that they will see later in the night. Soon after, Ivy calls him, but he tells her that he can't talk to her ever again as his relationship with Carla is getting serious. However, Ivy tells him that his relationship has been serious, but he still decided to make love with her and asks that he see her later that day to talk. The young Nolan could not refuse her offer and agrees to meet her, but Nolan heats the statue on him, killing him in the process. He then drags the dead body into the bathroom. Nolan picks up his phone and sees the puzzle he bought for Carla. As he walks outside, he says that he has become indifferent to the present while purging his past. The earthquake begins and Nolan says that he feels no less hollow as the abnormality ends. The movie ends with Nolan looking across the street and ignoring Carla's calls.